Hi everyone, Peyton here, and as you can probably tell, I'm re-recording my essay reading for my CD collection. I recently rewrote the paragraph on Linkin Park because there was a part I felt was a little insensitive, and I also made a couple revisions to my paragraph on Taylor Swift, but anyway, here it is. I would wish upon a star, but that star it doesn't shine. So read my book with a boring ending, a short story of a lonely guy who fell behind. Blink-182 Story of a Lonely Guy. The idea to start a CD collection came from my car. I drive a crap brown 2007 Hyundai Sonata that was loaned to me by my uncle's family. The stereo has no auxiliary port, and I don't feel like endlessly searching for radio stations beyond the numerous country channels my cousin set all the presets to when she drove the car. So over a few weeks this past summer, I took to Amazon and bought myself a bunch of plastic jewel cases to store in my center console. My collection currently consists of 11 CDs, or I guess 12 since one of them is a double album. I bought 9 of them used from Amazon, but had to replace 2 of them with new copies because the originals came to me scratched. One is a Fall Out Boy album I convinced my parents to get me for my 22nd birthday, and the last one I bought at a Barnes & Noble store in Salt Lake. The little evening trip to get the 10th one indirectly resulted in me getting locked out of my apartment for an entire night thanks to a broken lock and my roommates not being home, but it was worth it. Aside from the one Fall Out Boy album, my CDs all feature at least one member of Blink-182 on lead vocals, the result of my latest autistic hyperfixation, but I kind of like it this way. Since obtaining them, I realized just how much I prefer owning physical copies of music to having a bunch of downloads on my devices. Sure, streaming platforms like Spotify let you listen to whatever songs you want when you want, but for me, CDs just come with this satisfying sense of tangibility and permanence that digital downloads don't have. They come with the added benefit of not requiring a paid subscription, obligatory ad breaks between songs unless you're willing to pay for a more expensive subscription, or internet connection to work. They're cheaper than more vintage physical formats like vinyl that are somehow more popular. And might I add, you can also skip to whatever track you want without ruining them. And on top of all of that, they take me back to a time in my life where things were much simpler. I once watched a video that theorized most people come to be most attached to the music they listened to as teenagers, and I believe that to be true for most people. It would explain why baby boomers loved the classic rock they watched on black and white television, why Gen X vibes with the grunge movement, why millennials worship all the emo groups, and why Gen Z, my generation, jumps to everything they find on TikTok. But for the most part, I've never personally found the sentiment to be true for myself. In case it wasn't obvious by the groups I mentioned earlier, a lot of my favorite bands are the ones who were super popular when I was little, and I mainly attribute this to how my parents, particularly my dad, raised me. My dad is very quick to be critical of most popular songs that tend to become radio darlings, nitpicking the overprocessed vocals, the trap beats, the uninspired lyrics, and the obscene number of songwriters. He also despises musicals. On one occasion, he accompanied my mom and a couple of her siblings to a showing of that historically inaccurate Hugh Jackman film about P.T. Barnum without knowing it was a musical, only to loudly shout for the entire auditorium to hear once the opening number started, "What? I didn't know this was a musical!" As a side note, I'm not really sure how my dad managed to go into The Greatest Showman without realizing it was a musical, given that I distinctly remember the marketing showing clips from the musical numbers, but whatever. But he loves music nonetheless. There's a black and white photo of him I've known my entire life. It's a picture of him and his friends Steve, Jamie, and Scott huddled together on a couch and facing the camera with serious expressions. They almost look as though they're doing a photo shoot for Kerrang, that British magazine that all the rock, punk, and heavy metal fanatics read, which is fitting since it's from their days playing in a band together. They call themselves Doug Valley, a name even my dad admits was kind of terrible. He played bass, Steve was on lead vocals, and Scott and Jamie played guitar. They only ever had one song make the radio waves, I Tell Lies. The closest thing they had to a presence online was a pretty sparse MySpace page Uncle Steve made for the group that no longer works properly, and eventually they put the band to rest as marriage, kids, and life got in the way. But for them, because for them, music was always more of a hobby rather than a potential career route. But my dad, of course, has always been a musician at heart, and even after Doug Valley ended, his love of music didn't. Some of my earliest memories are of slipping into my parents' room to listen to him play his guitar. Sometimes I'd also sing in the best way my untrained 3-year-old singing voice could manage. I remember countless CDs he and my mom kept in those little photo album-like storage thingies that I always forget the name of, in the cabinets in our entertainment stand, the latter of which my youngest brother Ashton would later frequently ransack like he was some sort of tiny cop searching a drug dealer's motel room for coke. I remember sitting in the back seat of our cramped silver Hyundai with my oldest brother Caden and singing our hearts out to our parents' digital music library, with Caden often singing the main chorus line of Coldplay's The Scientist as nobody said it was easin'. I remember myself and my dad singing a whole song about Old MacDonald having diarrhea as we drove the moving truck during our family's huge move from Utah to California. And I remember my young autistic brain being absolutely fascinated by all the pretty shapes and colors the songs made on Windows Media Player's visualizations feature. But perhaps my fondest memories are of the song my dad wrote for me and my siblings. Each of us got one song. Mine was called The Sweetness, not to be confused with the fantastic Jimmy Eat World song of the same name, after my nickname, which my dad had derived from the nickname of Walter Payton, one of his favorite NFL running backs as a longtime Chicago Bears fan. Caden's was called Carry Me Away to match up with his initials, CMA, for Caden Michael Andriadakis. My sister Cassidy got Cassidy's song, making her the only one of us who is referenced by name in her song. And Ashton's song was It's a Never Long Way to Heaven, which contained some influences from Explosions in the Sky and had a small name drop to one of our family's favorite vacationing spots, Morro Bay. A lot of my dad's favorite bands included groups like Green Day, Blink-182, Jimmy Eat World, Foo Fighters, and The Killers. And luckily for me and Caden, we were both born in the early 2000s when most of these artists were at the height of their popularity, making it all the easier for our dad to raise us on their songs. Our music taste received influence from our mom as well, who was a fan of numerous alternative rock artists, particularly The Cure. She considered their hit single Just Like Heaven to be her and her dad's song, and even once wrote the lyrics in silver pen all over a picture frame she gifted to him as an anniversary present. I also distinctly remember she had the intro to Friday I'm in Love as the ringtone on her BlackBerry. This love of music seemed to carry with me as I became old enough to develop my own interests. Most of it was music my parents would most likely never listen to on their own. My first favorite band was The Wiggles, and I used to watch their TV show religiously along with other Playhouse Disney favorites like Bear in the Big Blue House. When I was a little older, I got really into Hannah Montana, and that show's season 2 soundtrack became the first CD I'd ever owned. But somewhere deep down, I always considered white dudes my dad's age playing loud, shreddy guitar solos to be my gold standard for music. Now I know what you must be thinking, Peyton, what is the point in you bringing all this up? And that's a good question. For a while I didn't really know the answer myself, and this essay sat unfinished without direction or purpose. But then the answer finally came to me from the strangest of sources. Recently, one of my favorite YouTubers, Kevin Perjurer, better known by his username Defunctland, released a documentary in which he tries to uncover the surprisingly elusive identity of the composer behind Disney Channel's famous 4-note jingle. Although it seems like a weirdly specific and niche topic on the surface, he manages to keep it engaging through a 90-minute journey filled with twists and turns, tireless research, supposed false leads and dead ends, and interviews that really make you come to appreciate the people behind all the bumpers and idents for your favorite TV channels growing up, he manages to finally identify the composer as Alex Lazarenko, a relatively obscure composer who worked for numerous media companies over the years and passed away in 2020 with most of his work under the radar. The main questions Kevin wants viewers to consider toward the end of the documentary are what kinds of projects are allowed to constitute art and what we choose to make an artist's legacy. He expresses his worry that by putting the documentary out into the ether, he'll be limiting Alex's legacy to a four-note mnemonic from a children's TV network, which he does make an effort to avoid by featuring some of Alex's other work throughout the film. He also laments that his own career doesn't look exactly how he imagined it would when he was a kid. This is visually represented a little earlier in the film when a shot of him coming across a Dear Future Me worksheet expressing his childhood desire to become an artist is silently juxtaposed with the wider context he assumes many of his viewers already know. That he primarily posts content about old theme park attractions and TV shows on YouTube for a living, something he knows certain crowds might not be willing to call art. He even expresses dread at knowing that most people outside his audience will most likely refer to the documentary as a YouTube video, despite him not personally viewing it that way, hence why I haven't called it a YouTube video here. But even still, the family, friends, and associates of Alex whom Kevin has interviewed throughout the documentary assure him that it doesn't matter what music ends up being Alex's legacy, because he always understood the bigger picture and put his heart and soul into every piece he made, including the Disney Channel theme, which evokes nostalgia and fond childhood memories for the millions of children who grew up with it, myself included, even if it might just seem like an unassuming set of four notes on the surface. In fact, one of my favorite scenes in the whole film shows Kevin reading a transcript of an interview a music consultant did with Alex in 2013. At the end of the interview, the consultant asks, "One final question, would you do anything differently?" And Alex replies, "No, no regrets." As a writer, I consider myself to be an aspiring artist in my own right, and I've often wondered if anyone would even care about what I have to say. All throughout my teenage years and even into college, I felt like I never had the interests or opinions that would be considered correct because my worldview isn't something that can so easily be fit into a box. I love my church and being a Christian, but I've also realized that this image of a goody two shoes Mormon girl who dresses like Sandy from Grease and only engages with boringly wholesome media designed to praise the Lord isn't me at all. I love secular music, films, and TV shows, and I want the stories I write to not shy away from sex, queer representation, and varying views on religion. Spending the past few years of my life single has made me realize that I don't want to spend the rest of my life single, but I'm glad that I'm taking some time to get to know myself first, contrary to what's considered normal for Mormons my age. And even when I do meet my future husband, I want us to enjoy some time as boyfriend and girlfriend before we consider marriage. Even though my overabundance of younger cousins on my dad's side of the family has made me swear off the Mormon norm of having several kids, being a fan of the show Bluey has made me realize that I do want to have kids eventually, even if it's just 2 or 3. And while I do plan to raise my children in my faith, I want to take a page out of my parents' parenting book and not make my kids feel pressured to think a certain way or even stay on the path their dad and I chose for them. I recognize that there are aspects of my faith and its leaders and members that are worthy of criticism, but I love my church far too much to leave it behind, and the ex-Mormon community doesn't really speak for me at all. I have strong opinions about the world around me and think it's important to stand up for what I believe in, but I also don't really have any desire to attend political rallies or consider myself to be much of an activist. For me, my writing is the only way I'll ever need to express how I feel about certain things. In a perfect world, having a nuanced perspective wouldn't be such a big deal, but in a day and age where there's a constant need to have a stark stance on things and defend a clear-cut, non-subjective truth, that isn't the case. You could call the coward a fence-sitter, a person who's part of the problem. You feel pressured to take on views you don't even have and allow yourself to be brainwashed into becoming a person you don't want to be. Even now, feel like I have to put on a mask in front of my peers, occasionally including my own friends and family, to make them accept me. On the rare occasion I've let that mask slip, I sometimes haven't expressed my thoughts and feelings very well, driven away people who once called me a friend. I have hurt people and made mistakes I wish I could go back and fix. There are times in my life I wish I'd put aside my religious convictions for 1 second to try and empathize with those who, unlike me, have said prayers along the lines of the chorus line from Letters to God by Boxcar Racer, because they differ too much from the mold that was expected of them. And I won't lie, I won't sin, maybe I don't want to go, can't you wait? Because sometimes defending his truth over just being a decent person is not what Jesus would have done at all, regardless of whether fundamentalist Christians want to admit it or not. At times I feel as though I can't make my voice heard over all the noise around me, a fact further enhanced by my autism and general social ineptitude. It's like I'm being drowned out by delay pedals and Tom DeLonge's hypnotic vocals singing "Like Violence You Kill Me," as though I'm the following poem Mark Hoppus faintly reads in the background of the bridge of Blink-182's Violence. A certain look in your eyes when you open your eyes will stand by your side, so watch my eyes. Watch them turn while you go change curtains down. Not all their skull was cut and I bled. There were forces of John Jones. I can't make you happy. Seems all I ever do is try. You can never cut me deep enough to leave a scar, so take this, keep it someplace safe. Does anything I say really matter? Then I think of all my favorite artists. I think of the 10-year-old boy from Oakland who ran into his room crying when his mother told him that his father had died of cancer and asked her to wake him up when September ended. And when she remarried to a man he and his siblings didn't like, he turned to music to vent his feelings, eventually becoming best friends with a fellow music connoisseur at school. Later, they started a rock band they decided to name after their mutual love of cannabis. I think of the passionate and visionary new metal singer from Phoenix who suffered through a lifetime of depression, sexual abuse, and drug addiction. Then by chance he was offered an audition for a band in California who accepted him as their lead singer after he and one of the other members discovered they worked really well together. Hand in hand, they released several mega successful records that inspired millions of fans going through the same struggles he was. And although said struggles eventually led him to the other side on July 20th, 2017, because to paraphrase his own lyrics from a song released in 2007, sometimes beginnings aren't so simple even when your friends all plead for you to stay. His impact isn't going anywhere anytime soon, as evidenced in early 2023 when an old demo he and his bandmates recorded back in 2002 became their most successful song in years. I think of the punk rock drummer from Ohio who was forced to start his music career anew when the band that made him famous disbanded after the lead singer was found dead in 1994. Everyone expected him to just drum for another band, but instead he decided to do the unexpected and start a new project helmed by his skills with songwriting and guitar playing that he was too intimidated to share with his last band because how in the world do you match up to Kurt Cobain? Initially starting out as an anonymous solo project under the name of a World War II term for UFOs that it would later end up getting stuck with. Much to his dismay, the project would later evolve into an actual band that would win over the hearts of many and collaborate with the likes of Paul McCartney and Tenacious D. And though their drummer would sadly pass away in March 2022, they still vowed to carry on in his memory. I think of the preschool friends from Mesa, Arizona, who decided to join forces with 2 other musicians to try their hand at music, taking the inspiration for their band's name from the rhythm guitarist's 2 little brothers who didn't get along, and the incident where the little brother named Ed tried to get back at the brother named Jim by drawing a picture of Jim shoving the earth into his mouth with the caption "Jimmy World." By the early 2000s, they'd carved out a career playing pop-punk songs and were able to prove their place in the genre despite not being as pierced, leather-clad, and eyeliner as some of their contemporaries. I think of the metal bassist from Chicago who hated how the local scene seemed to be trading political activism for an emphasis on moshing and breakdowns, so he and his guitarist friend decided to start a new band. they were in need of a lead singer, the guitarist decided to take a chance on a music nerd he met at a bookstore, who, despite being socially awkward and preferring to stay in the background with the drums when he was on stage, was so musically talented and had a phenomenal singing voice. After struggling for a while to keep a permanent lineup and get a record label, the bassist began feeling tempted to call it quits, but the lead singer encouraged him to not give up by saying, "No, that's not fair. Don't leave me with this band. Don't make me kind of like this band and then leave it. That's bullshit." So he did stay, and it turned out to be worth it because they eventually signed a deal with Fueled by Ramen, gradually growing their fan base and becoming a force to be reckoned with. I think of the awkward musician nicknamed Weezer by his dad, who trekked from Los Angeles to Connecticut in the late 80s with his high school band, only for them to very quickly part ways. But then he met and moved in with a few new bandmates, and after a few failed stints under a rotating set of short-lived names like Buzz and 60 Wrong Sausages, they finally secured a gig under the name most people know them by today and opened for Keanu Reeves' band Dogstar. I had no idea Keanu used to play in a band prior to researching for this essay, but now that I do, I think it's rad. I think of the Mormon kid from Las Vegas who wanted to give up on music for a time after getting fired from his first band in 2001, but realized being in a rock band was his calling when he attended an Oasis concert. After finding an ad in a newspaper, he met up with a guitarist who'd recently moved to Vegas from Iowa. They bonded over similar interests in music and started writing songs together, naming their band after a fictional group in a New Order music video. They played their first live show in early 2002 and started drawing attention from the unique style they brought to the small Vegas music scene. The lead singer continues to actively practice his faith despite working for an industry where religion isn't exactly popular or celebrated, while also advocating for those his church tends to marginalize. While a lot of his fans agree that the band's more recent work isn't as good as their early albums, they still come back to their shows anyway because the lead singer is just such a likable and beautiful man. I think of the girl from Pennsylvania who grew up on a Christmas tree farm and dreamed of becoming a singer like her grandmother, so she moved to Nashville in the hopes of following in the footsteps of female country artists she admired. After some trial and error, her music career took off when she was only 16 years old. She continued to stay true to the style of music she wanted to make and expressed what she wanted to in her songs, despite the objections of others, including her own father and sometimes even her own fans, and stayed strong when others tried to take credit for her accomplishments and even stole the rights to a good portion of her music catalog. And when a petty feud with a rapper over song lyrics caused her to retreat into hiding for a year, she came back stronger than ever. I think of the girl from Tennessee who wanted to follow in her dad's footsteps in music and acting despite her parents' initial reservations. She later blew up in popularity doing a Disney Channel show where her character was a normal high schooler by day and a famous teen pop sensation in a blonde wig by night. She was also responsible for the first few CDs Lil Peyton ever owned and performed at the first concert Lil Peyton ever attended at BYU's football stadium as her 7th birthday present. As the years went on, though, the girl inevitably grew up and got tired of Disney trying to drown her under layers of pretty pink sequins and the boring wholesomeness of twang bubblegum pop, even as she desired to branch out and try her hand at edgier rock music. And she got sick of being forced to apologize to perpetually offended parents for things they probably wouldn't care less about if she weren't a teen idol on a children's TV network. So she forcibly showed the world the style and image she really wanted to make Disney want nothing to do with her. And while her more recent work hasn't been my taste personally, growing up from a little girl who liked pink skirts and long pigtails to a young woman who prefers short hair and band t-shirts with jeans has made me retrospect that Lil Peyton had tried to be a little more understanding. This girl's music will always hold a special place in my heart, even if the only reason I bought 2 of her CDs recently was to make a joke case for 2 Blink-182 CDs I brought for my brother, who will be returning home from his mission soon. I think of the 2 idiot guitar players from SoCal who were introduced by the sister of the one who preferred bass because she got sick of them constantly nagging her about how much they wanted to start a band. The two immediately hit it off and were writing songs together even on that first day. It was love at first sight, as the bassist's sister put it. After joining forces with a drummer who arguably knew how to handle his instrument more than they knew how to handle their own, they popularized pop punk for a whole new generation, and despite admittedly not being the greatest live musicians in the world, won their fans over with their goofy charm, clear refusal to take themselves seriously, and infectious chemistry akin to an old married couple with the maturity of high school freshmen. But for every song about penis jokes, prank calls, and having sex with dogs, there were also songs that dealt with suicidal ideation, watching your parents get a divorce, and being stuck in a toxic relationship. They proved that they could take songwriting seriously and weren't totally incompetent when it came to music. And the guitarist realized he enjoyed, even preferred, making those kinds of songs and getting praise for it, especially after he started a side project that excluded the bassist. That, along with differences in priorities and musical philosophies, drove them apart, and they would continue to have their ups and downs over the years as the guitarist became addicted to progressive space rock, and the bassist just wanted to stick to the cheesy songs that made them famous. But as their music demonstrated, even when they were apart, they could never truly forget about each other and would be brought back together time and again through plane crashes and cancer. And even though not everyone likes the latest song they've made together, I personally find it to perfectly encapsulate everything they've gone through over the years and to be incredibly self-aware, particularly the lines, "I know there's a special place in hell that my friends and I know well." I think of my dad, who grew up in Colorado Springs with divorced parents as the oldest of 4 kids, or technically the second oldest of 5 kids, as he had an older sister who died as a baby. He loved playing the guitar and writing his own songs. He spent most of his professional working life as a photographer and later as a school psychologist, but he never forgot his love of music, and he wouldn't let me and my siblings grow up without it. To go off on a seemingly unrelated tangent, one of my favorite songs from my CDs is All of This by Blink-182, featuring Robert Smith from The Cure. It reminds me of both of my parents' taste in music, and I love it so much that I plan for it to be one of many of my favorite songs that I incorporate into an original novel series I'm working on. I also personally consider it to easily be one of the most underrated songs Blink has ever made. Perhaps the thing I hate the most about their infamous hiatus from 2005 to 2009 was that it got in the way of the song being made into a single. Follows a narrator who continually bends over backward for his lover Holly, despite knowing deep down how codependent their relationship is. It was inspired by a toxic dynamic Blink's producer at the time, the late and great Jerry Finn, had with a girl he had an unrequited crush on in middle school, also named Holly. All 3 members of the band, bassist Mark, guitarist Tom, and drummer Travis, were massive fans of The Cure, particularly Mark, who had a fixation on Just Like Heaven growing up, and even dressed like Robert in high school down to the wiry dark hair and bright red lipstick. As such, all of this was one of 2 songs on their untitled 2003 album to draw heavy sound influences from The Cure's The Love Cats, the other being the album's hit single I Miss You. In that vein, they began toying with the idea of inviting Robert to record a feature for the song and eventually reached out to him. They were almost certain he would turn them down. After all, he was one of the most well-respected musicians in the world, and they were a trio of idiots from San Diego who more or less made a living singing about male genitals. But to their surprise, he said yes. He'd admittedly had a hard time seeing how he could fit into their discography, but he still liked some of the demos they'd sent him and recognized a mutual reluctance from both of their bands' respective fan bases for them to evolve musically. He even gave Blink advice in what is easily one of my favorite quotes from a musician. "Nobody knows what kinds of songs you are going to write in the future, and nobody knows the full potential of any band. I really like the music you sent me." I doubt most of my favorite artists knew the effect their songs would have on literally every single one of their fans, and you can't blame them. After all, you can't read other people's minds, much less when millions of people are involved. But perhaps one of the best rewards of making art is when it ends up having an impact on others that you never fully considered. And for me, my favorite music reminds me of the connection I share with my parents and siblings, the people who've always made me feel the most like myself and never made me feel like I had to pretend to be somebody else. And in a weird way, it also reminds me that as much as I might tell myself that I don't have a lot in common with my peers, I find that I do when I know where to look. I might have inherited a lot of my dad's distaste for modern popular music and outgrown my pop phase a long time ago. There are still a few pop artists I love, such as Taylor Swift, even if I'm not as obsessed with her music as some of my friends are. I might not instantly relate to my classmates' stories of family members they're estranged from and friends who've let them down, but then I remember how I actually don't have a picture perfect Mormon family. My dad's parents are divorced. I have a grandpa who doesn't feel like he can attend church regularly anymore because he thinks he's done too many things wrong. One of my aunts got out of an extremely toxic marriage only a few years ago. I have to remind myself that as easy as it is to get frustrated with her two little girls, they didn't always have the best home life. Like Robert Smith said, I don't know what art I'm going to make. I also don't know how or if it'll touch others. After all, I still have no way of knowing if anyone will even want to read the words I write, much like how I don't know if anyone's reading this essay and engrossed in what I'm saying. But who knows? Maybe one day people will read my book with a boring ending, a short story of a lonely girl who fell behind.